Hi everyone, this is Kimara from Warhammer and Weebs. Today's episode, Joel and I are discussing what makes a television show, and many of these television shows throughout history have produced some somewhat dark content, including sexual assault, grooming of a minor, and various other elements that you may or may not be comfortable with. So, we appreciate all of you listeners. We appreciate you giving us your time of day. And so that same appreciation extends to giving you this warning to allow you the opportunity to opt out. With that in mind, always glad to have you here. And as always, thanks for listening. And now, without further ado, this is Warhammer and Weebs. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are nerds here to talk about it. I'm Kimara.
I'm Joel.
Welcome to Warhammer and Weebs, a podcast about Warhammer, for Warhammer, and everything else we inevitably feel like talking about.
Yes, and if you want to continue to follow us outside this podcast, follow us at Warhammer Weaves at Blue Sky social or on Tumblr, again, tumblr.com/Warhammer Weaves. Of course, the YouTube channel at Warhammer and Weebs. Subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. Always helps. So, how are you doing this week? Anything fun going on? Or at least the week of this recording?
I am trying to get all my ducks in a row. Trying to between anticipation for our weekly recording session. I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row the best I can to try to find ways to see all the boobies I want to see.
Ooh, I know that feeling. Not only, I mean, I got my advanced tickets to Mando and Grogu. I might though now be seeing a movie before that at the Spectrum. I have the new Gundam movie, The Hathaway. Part two is coming out. It's a trilogy. It's sadly not playing at the local theater that I can walk to, so I have to go to the Spectrum if I want to see it. So I might do that as well. So I feel you there. I feel you there. I'm feeling pumped. Just got out of some therapy, so I feel good as of this recording. And I'm also excited because a new poster from My Adventures with Superman came out. I'm so hyped. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with that show. It's coming out next month, and I'm so excited to see it because it has my favorite version of Supergirl so far. Because I love that version of Supergirl. She's so angry. They really went with the very angry alien Supergirl in this one, so she's still very much fresh off the Krypton and doesn't know anything about Earth, and it's hilarious. And she has this cute little relationship with Jimmy in the show, which I find adorable.
I
Have you
remain in
seen?
my heart a supercore sheeper,
That's
but
fair. But have you seen this
but
version of Supergirl from the show or any clips? Like,
I've seen clips. You showed me clips.
that's true. I just didn't want to. Well, you know what? It's been a month. It's been a year. I'll spoil it at this point. She's like full on thinks that she's doing the greater good of the Kryptonian Empire. She's got a Darth Vader like suit with a red cape. Anybody who's She-Ra fans, very Dispara core. And she was raised by Brainiac, who is her Shadow Weaver and Mother Gothel, and a robot, and Horde Prime all in one.
Yeah,
It's
I've,
terrible.
I've seen. I saw the finale to season two. Um, I don't know. You and I have talked about it, and you know it. And anyone else who knows me will know it. How much I rant about the what could have been of the Supergirl TV show.
The CW show.
Yeah. Originally CBS show.
That's right. That's right. It was on regular TV.
Yeah. Season one was CBS, and it definitely you can definitely tell the camera work, the writing's better, the emotions hit better, the um CGI is better.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Then they moved to I think they went to Toronto after season one. 'Cause CBS didn't want it anymore, and then um CW got it, and I think they moved to Toronto because it was cheaper to film there,
Mhm.
and it was already that was already in itself a shame because when they left, they ended up oh, I don't remember exactly. She played Cat Grant. It was Calista Flockhart, and she was awesome. She was a really, really, really great actress, and she couldn't go because she didn't want to move, as
Right.
far as I remember. So they lost her after season one, which kind of sucked because she was a very, very interesting, fun part. She came back at the end, um, but she had different cameos throughout the series. But that was one big, big part that was like, okay, um, that was a big loss for the character. They kind of made it better because they got Katie McGrath, aka Lena Luthor, aka Morgana from Merlin, come in.
Oh my god, I forgot about Merlin. That's a show from a long time ago.
Man, I remember just like even the Merlin Arthur shippers were right up there with like the supernatural. I'm forgetting. I'm blanking on the name. It's which one's in love with the angel? It was a huge
I don't know,
thing.
I never watched Supernatural. I
I
always
never
thought they were more like the Wholock
don't
people
either.
or the Sherlock it's British.
I I know Supernatural for two things. Um, because it came on, if I remember correctly, came on either before or after Smallville, and what else? It pretty much, for better or worse, created the Omegaverse concept in fandoms.
Oh god. Oh no, not
Yeah,
the
it,
Omegaverse.
a lot of it. That's as I understand it. A lot of it was linked to that, and it created one of the greatest meme formats on Tumblr. I
Ooh.
love you dash everything, and it's
Oh,
how I learned.
that's where that's from? Oh my
That was
gosh.
the supernatural. It was. There was a very fun, interesting post because I remember this happening because if I remember correctly, it was I want to say it was the 2020 election. That was it, and
Uh,
it
yeah.
was it was November 4th, 2020, and it was election night. This
Oh,
was post. This was
yeah.
Trump was running for a second term. Biden was running, and there was me and there was me in half the country going through YouTube and whatever else. And you were either watching the Supernatural finale or you
Oh god.
were watching the Supernatural finale to try to distract yourself from the election results.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That sounds
And
about
there's
right.
this hilarious Tumblr timeline, the series of events. And I remember, like, it burned in my brain of every time you refreshed your dashboard, there was just minute by minute, second by second screenshots of the Supernatural finale interspaced between up to the minute election results by state.
That's hilarious. And I love that. That's great. 'Cause I've seen that meme. I've seen, like, "I love you. This is what's going on in the real world right now, and it's sad."
Yeah, it was perfect. I
"I love you."
It's a whole controversy. People were pissed, and that's just my understanding of Supernatural in a nutshell. I've never actually seen an episode.
I'm not either. That's all I know. I just now know the meme because I see the meme all the time. Every time a bit of news hits, it's like, "I love you. We have started to bomb this country. I love you. We've kidnapped the
The Queen
president of the."
died. Oh God,
exactly the queen.
we kidnapped the president of. Oh jeez. Okay.
Ex- but no, that's hilarious. But yeah, yeah. Um,
Oh, and Jen Ackles played Soldier Boy.
oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, that's where he's from. But yeah, that was yeah. No, one of these days I will. One of these days I will sit down and rant about Supergirl. But today is not that day because we have another discussion we actually want to talk about.
Yes. My friend, my co-host, I have a question. What makes a kids show? That is the question that we're here to discuss. Because I think out of all the types of TV in the world, and there's a lot of it, I think the term kids show has become weirdly the most malleable, the most thing that has evolved over time in terms of just general entertainment. And I feel like TV especially TV has struggled with this question. We can probably bring up movies to some extent, but I always feel like movies have always been a bit more concrete in what they are. But TV has always been kind of that question mark, especially children's animated TV. Because I think of family shows. Like we had, you know, like back when to go back in time because sometimes you got to start from the beginning. Go back in time. I definitely think there were definitely family shows. Right? I think of the Andy Griffin Show, the Dick Van Dyke Show, and then the '70s like All in the Family, MASH, Good Times, The Jeffersons. You know, they were for the kids and the adults. Sometimes Star Trek too, right? You know, like they were for the adults, but the kids could enjoy it. You know, like oh, look, Spock and his silly ears, and also deep questions about the future and humanity and life and blah blah blah. Then we get to the '80s. And basically, that's when all of the big toy-etic quote unquote kid shows come. Transformers, He-Man, She-Ra, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, all the big ones. My Little Pony for the girls. Um, and you had just these shows that were pretty basic, pretty simple, and pretty. They're just good guys, bad guys, fight, etc. They're fun, obviously, we love them. It's not until, honestly, when you get to when we were growing up as kids in the '90s, or at least when I was growing up as a kid in the '90s, um, that's when the term kids show starts to get a little more malleable because you had Animaniacs, you had Batman the animated series. That was a big one in terms of just pushing a little bit what a kid show can be, what you can deal with. It doesn't have to be mindless all the time. And obviously, then get the early 2000s to the mid 2000s when I think that really started to take off. Um, but I guess I'll throw it to you. Why do you think the term kid show, compared to say definitely adult show or even teen show, to some extent, has always been more of a malleable question compared to the others, where we can say something from Bluey to later seasons of the Clone Wars still can count as kid shows. Like,
Honestly, I think I'd actually push back on what an earlier statement you said because movies in particular, they all I would argue they're not quite as they weren't for a long time they actually weren't quite as concrete as you think. Like one of the more infamous examples, of course, is um was I think it was Watership Down,
ooh, interesting.
and it is that set of it was from the 1970s, and it's almost become a meme.
Mhm.
Not just that movie, but like several other movies from the 70s and 80s, where you have these very dark visuals occurring. These very interesting. Like
Oh, the bunny
if I
movie. The bunny movie, yes.
yeah, and you've got the scene, where obviously, yes, it's nature, but it's also
Mhm.
scenes where live mice are being impaled on thorns.
Right.
So, and then even if just stepping away from that for a moment, um, going back to well, live action stuff. Think about the Terminator. Think about RoboCop. Two movies that were very much not necessarily designed for kids, but got marketed to kids excessively.
That's true. That's true. I think
Like,
they're both technically rated R movies. I think
like RoboCop literally has a scene where a guy is just snorting coke off of a hooker's boobs.
Yeah, I really do gotta watch the Terminator. It's one of those things where I've always lived through it via amorphous.
Yeah,
Um,
like Terminator, women are being hunted down and murdered, like from the get go.
I
You
mean
gotta
that's
say,
true.
oh, sorry,
I guess you're
go ahead.
no, no. I'm thinking about it, and I guess you're right. I guess I was thinking too animation based, where even then it's like, the early Disney movies. It's like they got their dark moments. They weren't deep, but they definitely had their moments.
Well, yeah, I think that brings us like to three primary questions. If I'm thinking about this question that you're spitballing at me, which is first things first, and this might seem the most awkward and strange question, but I think it's a vital one to consider. What do we consider to be a child?
That's true. Um, because I'm gonna be honest, I don't even think I myself have a good answer for that. Because childhood's such a spectrum in an odd sense. I know that's weird to say, but it's like I mean, I'm 30 now. I still think I look at a 20-year-old and still think you're a kid, which is not legally true, but like I don't know. I've met some 20-year-olds like you're still a youngin in my eyes. I mean, definitely. I mean, probably even teenagers to me, especially like I don't care if you're 13, technically a teenager, you're still a kid in my eyes. And then again, but even then, it's like maturity. Everyone matures differently. There's scientific evidence of like how girls mature faster than boys and all that stuff too. But also, ages 1 to 6, very different from ages 8 to 10, 9 to 11, right? I'm just thinking back to my own childhood. Although mom was pretty nice about letting me watch more or less anything within reason. Just she didn't like The Simpsons. I had to wait till I was a teenager for that. But I was a
Honestly,
kid. I
same.
watched. Oh yeah, but for the most part, it's like I watched classics like Powerpuff Girls and Rugrats on Nickelodeon and Samurai Jack and Batman the Animated Series, and I also watched a little bit of anime, even though I had no idea what's going on. I didn't even know that was anime at the time. I just thought, oh, this looks funny, like Tenchi and Sailor Moon, Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon, but those were obviously more geared towards younger audiences. But even then, it's like there's a big difference between, I don't know, me watching Blue's Clues one next and then, watching an episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Even the 4 Kids dubbed version that got rid of all the guns and swearing in the blood.
Yeah, invisible guns.
Invisible guns. Um, Even Pokemon got rid of the invisible guns. Although it's funny when you're watching old clips of Pokemon and realizing, dang, old school Ash was a bit of a misogynist. We'd always call Misty like ugly and stuff. Like, you're the ugly girl. Like, damn, dude. I get why
I,
Misty would smack you. Um,
he's also 10,
that's true. That's true. Um,
which isn't necessarily an excuse exactly, but I it,
he's 10 and
actually, you
he
know what?
ends up at 11 by the end of the series, 20 years later.
Actually, it's not really an excuse because he grows up in a pretty much single family home with his mom, so he should be far more respectful.
Yeah, what the heck? Um, but it is weird, isn't it? Because, obviously these shows I'm talking about, like Blue's Clues, Batman, Pokemon, you know, all have different age ranges for sure, but we all count them as quote unquote kid shows. And in some sense, I feel like childhood itself is almost in categories. To some extent, like ages 1 to 5 should be different than, say, ages 5 to 8 and then 10 to 12. Like, I always would say that, there's the old adage of like, "Oh, Star Wars is for 12-year-olds," that sort of age-old adage. But in some sense, like, unless you're a very like, I was a weird kid, so I would watch things at different ages, but if you wanted a more controlled environment, yeah, I probably would start my kids at Star Wars, like, I could probably show them Phantom Menace and maybe A New Hope at, like, I don't know, 10, if they're depending on, like, how squeamish they get, and then maybe wait a couple years before we get to Revenge of the Sith because that's a little more intense. Um, and I don't know, I mean, I I don't think Andor is necessarily made with the kids in mind, but at the same time, it's like, I could see a 12-year-old probably, if they're like me and weird and interested in that sort of thing, enjoying it. Um, I don't consider that quote unquote a kid show, but it's certainly something I think they can enjoy. And I think that's the kind of. But I guess what's your answer? Where do you think childhood is? What do you,
Honestly, before today, I never really thought because I guess childhood essentially becomes, I would argue, in theory, childhood is whatever that your child is interested in. If they carry that to adulthood, well, that just becomes a part of them. You could argue it, in many ways, it segues into the second question I have
Mhm.
because I would argue, in broad strokes, childhood never truly ends.
It's a good. I like that. It's getting philosophical here, folks.
Like, there's you get the quotes, "Oh, child at heart," or you
Mhm.
have the condemnation. That's children's thing. That's why you looking at that kid stuff. But there's the argument to be made that stopgaps are a social construct,
That is
and
true.
you are never really done with your childhood. It just evolves. Which brings me to my second question then. What what are the limits of what do we consider appropriate? Because much of children's television
Mhm.
is gate kept between what is considered appropriate for a child to watch and what isn't. And that level of appropriateness determines what age range that television show or even movies are allowed to be or encouraged to be marketed towards.
I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to sound weird, but follow my logic because I think we can use this. Okay. You know how Star Wars has shows like Young Jedi Adventures and Andor on that
Yes.
scale? Let me ask you this, and I apologize. I'm no, and feel free to edit this out. I'm going to say try to be it as PC as possible so we don't get in trouble. How would you ever feel, just abstract, if a He-Man or She-Ra reboot had a sexual assault scene? Because that happened in Andor. And we can talk about it like if it was tacky or not, but just on the concept.
I think
I know that's such a weird question, but I feel like that's a kind of what we have to ask ourselves in terms of
well, no,
just
it's not a weird question because part of the conversation, part of the reason we ended up getting into this topic before was a discussion on Star Wars.
that's true. Yes. So good question.
Because on one hand, you have Young Jedi Adventures. On one hand, you have Clone Wars with young Ahsoka, learning and growing and being a kid and having her fun and doing all this stuff, even in the backdrop of war. On one hand, you also have that, but on the other hand, you also have the episode where a canonical 16-year-old is dressed up as a pleasure slave for
Yep.
Vision. You have the concept of like Tatooine itself and slavery, where Anakin's mother is a slave. Anakin is a slave. There's an entire slave trade.
You have an
You
evil
have
fascist empire. Let's as the main bad guy. For a good
You
chunk
have
of it.
well, I mean, like in terms of the sexual assault and
That's true.
sexualization in a show that shouldn't. Oh, I can't even say shouldn't because that was part of the reason we ended up kind of starting the beginnings of this discussion because
Mhm.
there was the idea, well, um, that some want to don't want to. I won't say they don't want to acknowledge, but they'd like it's understandable that you don't kind of many people wouldn't kind of want to think about that.
And
But
I
it's
will also
also
say that just to kind of counter, a lot of the time when these things happen, they're always written by white guys. It's also a problem of just who's writing these things, which I will 100%
yeah,
which has always been
yeah,
sort of
it,
but I think we're
yeah.
talking on the abstract here and not just the
On the
execution.
abstract,
Right.
which actually, you know what? That actually, you know what? We're gonna put a pin in question two and segue to question three that's been burning in my head,
Sure,
which
sure.
is when we consider childhood and we consider the appropriateness of childhood,
Mhm.
are we fully, are we only to, are we only to consider what is text, or are we supposed to consider what is also subtext?
That's I mean, what would be an example of that just so I can think of something?
Well, again, like if we take the Star Wars example of, you take the Star Wars example of, okay, yes, slavery be bad,
Mhm.
obviously, but
Right.
then if you ever, or even if we take the, let's go episode six, you know, where you have um Jabba
Mhm.
and he has like a Twi'lek sex slave.
Sexy lady.
Leia
Slave
gets,
lady.
yeah, sexy Leia gets put into this bikini, and just obviously obviously it becomes fetish for a lot of people, for adults down the line, but as a kid, you're just like, oh, well, she's just wearing a weird costume, and then you contemplate like if you really start thinking about like, okay, well, not only is there effectively sexual assault,
Mhm.
and at the very limit, like at the very minimum,
Mhm.
there is some form of assault or sexual assault. Even if things don't get necessarily to a certain level,
Right.
there is also at some point throughout gunpoint, presumably, someone forced Leia to strip down and put that on, probably while watching her. There is a violation in that.
I mean,
And it's
isn't there, like, a scene where Jabba's, like, licking his tongue at her, like, "Ugh," she
yeah,
says, like,
that's canonical. He's licking his tongue. You can tell,
gross.
they're laughing, there's groping.
Mhm.
It's not always necessarily on screen, but then you
Right.
consider, even just the jump from A to B, Leia in disguise to Leia in a bikini, chained up,
Right.
where it's something happened in between that point, even if that is not text, where we don't have an entire 10-minute scene of some, you know, creepy bounty hunter pointing a
Right.
gun at Leia and telling her to strip.
Mhm.
What subtext is, we know that happened. So, with in terms of what is appropriate for kids, what we consider appropriate for kids, are we to only ever consider the text or the subtext along with that? Is subtext purely for just adults and kids who can contemplate and understand that? Or is all of that supposed to be taken into account when that is presented and to regards to what is appropriate?
That's a hard question because yeah, yes, I mean, I didn't think about that sort of stuff. I didn't even think about the costume really until, like, someone pointed it out, which, that's society for you. It's also but, it is one of those interesting things, like, yeah, because on the one hand, I'm like, "I'm glad they didn't do that." It probably wouldn't have been very good.
No.
Um, you know, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, we probably do we acknowledge it? Is it bad? I always think about,
I mean, yes,
um
bad.
I mean, it's bad, it's bad. And then it's sort of like behind the scenes stuff too. Like I always, this is one of my go-to examples with Indiana Jones. We're just gonna bring up Lucasfilm stuff today. Where you watched the first Indiana Jones movie, have you?
Yeah,
Okay, so there's a
that
scene
Raiders
where
of the Lost
Mary.
Ark. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so there's a scene where Miriam's talking to Indy, and she's like, "I was young, you were handsome, and blah blah blah." And you ask the writers, and one of the writers kind of like straight up go like, "Oh yeah, he was 15, Indy was 20 when they."
Ooh boy.
They've walked that back because there's no evidence for that. Um, in the text, but the writers sometimes one writer thought subtext wise, you know, she was young, Indy was also stupid and older, so yeah. Um, you can. This was the '80s, guys. People didn't think that much about it until now. Yeah, it wasn't good then, but still. Yeah, all your favorite heroes are probably cancelable. I'm so sorry.
Oh
But it is
boy.
it is interesting, right? I mean, here's kind of here's a I'll use a modern example if you want, because I think there's some interesting subtext here too. Um, we don't see Catcher from She-Ra get her hair done and put in chipped and go in the pool, but you know that happened. You know something got happened that was bad, really bad, very very bad. Um, they
She
took
has
her mask.
nightmares about it.
They took her mask off. Oh yeah, we actually do see her get in the pool for like 5 seconds. So I mean, I guess it is more Texans, but like we know that
But we
there's
see
a
her
full.
POV as she's like being pushed in and like
Yeah, but we also call Kira a kid show, despite the fact that a very allegorical. You know what's actually funny? Actually, this kind of goes back to my original question. It's not exactly that, but it's kind of allegorical to that, right? That I've always kind of viewed it that way.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
certainly very violating.
It meant, and because I think Nate Stevenson has kind of gone on record and mentioned that, right? That
Mhm,
it's supposed to be kind of, it's a very, as much as Horde Prime and She-Ra and Princesses of Power is meant to sort of be that allegorical, cult-like religious figure
right,
of, he's the pure, he knows what's good for you, he's everything he touches is pure. Oh, they all wear white. It's all very creepy.
mhm,
And it's that stripping of that forceful stripping of identity,
mhm,
of your body no longer belongs to you. It is in
mhm,
service of this other person, this male who can go
mhm.
ahead and decide what's best for you.
But yet we still consider She-Ra very much a kid show, or at least a tween show. Um, Compared to something like in He-Man, I think it's Revelations, where Evil Lyn and Skeletor are getting it on. Or at least
And
for
that's
like
probably
5 seconds. For 5 seconds before Evil Lyn's like, "Yoink! I take the sword now." What? Um, but I guess it is interesting. I feel like we as society kind of do care more about the text than the subtext then, because I think of the catcher moment. I know what it is. I kind of can I see it in the way it's portrayed, but yet we don't see the rating for She-Ra go massively up compared to Revelations, which has blood, got a couple little moments like that. I mean, it's a little bit more vulgar. Definitely more vulgar than She-Ra. It's not as bad as I think it could have been under certain circumstances for sure. I've seen some versions of He-Man stories that are like way worse, both in the comics and just in terms of just drafts that never got made. Thank God. Um, but it is interesting. I feel like we value text more than subtext. Then, at least
I'm
that's how
wondering.
I see it.
Wait, I'm trying to see because I think one of the most prominent examples I have right now in my mind, because the soundtrack is still on my mind, is K-pop Demon Hunters.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, right now for anyone who has not seen K-pop Demon Hunters. Go see it.
Yeah, what are you doing? It's on Netflix or yep, it's like
Yeah, go see it because when they make the sequel in about 4 or 5 years, it's going to be in theaters, and you're going to be paying 16, 17, $18.
or
I'll still pay
17.
it, but
Well, I'm
still.
paying it for I'm paying it for IMAX. Paying for that
Oh yeah,
IMAX.
they learn their lesson. They're going to put that thing in theaters. But um, K-pop yeah. So K-pop Demon Hunters is rated PG, which I think discussion of film and TV ratings is a discussion we should probably have in a moment.
Mhm,
But it's rated PG. But spoiler alert for there is that vital scene in the last quarter of the movie
mhm.
where Rumi's on the ground giving her sword to her mother figure and pretty much telling it's worded as you know, do what you should have done before I destroy what I swore to protect. Yes, the line lives rent free in my head, but it's worded that way. But anyone who's anyone, even kids to it, can pretty much see this. There's very little else you can contemplate the result of this happening when someone's on their knees presenting a sword and baring their neck and saying, finish, get rid of the problem, and also implying I am the problem.
Kill me.
Yeah, they don't say the K word,
Mhm.
but also in the PG-13 movie, the main character is saying, "Help me, give me assisted suicide."
Pretty much, yes. I do think, in terms of how we rate things, in terms of how we as society, then I think that does kinda say that we as a society judge the text more than the subtext in so many ways, right? Like, we almost need like, I feel like if Rumi had just come out and say, "Kill me, mom," that just bumps up the rating, right?
Yeah,
That goes from PG to PG-13, maybe R.
I mean South Park, the South Park movie back in the '90s, they famously skirted that because there was like you could only have a certain number of curse words in your movie before I think it became went from like I think it was R to NC-17,
I know
and
Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, I think, was the reason the PG-13 rating was created. 'Cause I think I forget. Because here's the thing, back then, I think it was just G, PG, and then R, I think. I
yeah,
don't remember what the ratings were PG,
it
because here's
was
the thing, Indiana Jones
GPR.
or maybe it was just
I think PG-13 came later.
yes, it was after Indy 2, because Indy
Yeah,
what 2 was PG. But if you watch Indiana Jones: and The Temple of Doom, that movie's grotesquely dark and got a lot of just, "Holy moly, what's going on here?"
yeah, yeah. Like they skirted that. They managed to skirt that because I think like you had to have if you had over 99 curse words in your movie, you went from R to NC-17. And so they had specifically 99.
Dang. Oh, that's kind of awesome. You wanna know a funny kind of random fact? Because you know how, like, hell has become, like, a curse word these days?
Has it?
I feel like people count hell as a curse word.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard this happen. I'm trying to remember.
Well, anyway, the point is,
Because they say hell in
Maleficent in Sleeping
KPD.
Beauty says hell in the movie because she's summoning all the powers of hell, for
Uh,
her evil, and it's like it's kinda made fun of now because, like, "Oh, Maleficent said a curse word today."
through that. I feel like Damn was that way too for a while.
But yeah, it is interesting. Like, I'm also thinking, like, because there's a bunch of movies where, like, they're rated either PG or PG-13 or let me see, I wanna check something, like, Jurassic Park is rated that's a PG-13, But there's a lot of darker subtext with, like, what the adults are doing and, like, there's a divorce in the background and something like that.
I argue the divorce is more real than dark, but like you're also in a movie where people are literally being torn apart by dinosaurs.
That's true. That's true. But it is interesting kind of thinking about it because I think kind of go back to Star Wars. It's like Star Wars had a lot of subtext, like you said, like slavery and what happened with Leia. And we don't bring it up, at least in fan discussions, but at the same time, society didn't judge it that way. And maybe that's because just society in the 80s was more agreeable to weird things happening. I don't think you get away with that these days. Like, that happened to Ray in the sequel trilogy. Oh, God. Um, but, um,
Oh, yeah, Jaws was PG too.
that's true. So, I do wonder if these days, if we maybe we do value subtext a little bit more these days. We're more sophisticated. I like to think we're in some ways more sophisticated. Um, but we do still if something's more explicit, then that rating's going up.
Mm. Because I know one, if we downgrade from movies and down to I guess more children's television, Bluey has become one of those shows that's become very very praised for its ability to be very entertaining to younger children, while also presenting these different topics and discussion points. And I know one of the most highly praised and controversial episodes of the series was the miscarriage episode, where
Right.
yeah, well, I think one of the main character's mother, it's either implied or shown or mentioned. I think it's heavily implied at some point that like he has or it had a miscarriage.
Right. Yeah, because the went pop and then there was like a moment of like, oh shit. Um and I know yeah, it's I think because then I think that's also I think a lot of it's also just how well you can get away with subtext over text, right? Like you can heavily imply things. But I think we still weirdly value showing it, like, if we didn't say, "Oh, Bluey's mom had a miscarriage," then that rating goes up. Also, by the way, I looked it up, She-Ra has a TVY7 rating, and He-Man Revelations has a PG rating. I don't think that's right, but I definitely
I think that makes sense. Oh, that
let me
makes
actually look it up.
sense. Mm, I mean, that does come down to it's like, well, even just
There's
the miscarriage
blood.
concept, where it's like, if you remember 10 minutes of Up, aka the most devastating 10 minutes in any animated Pixar Disney film ever,
Yep.
she has a like, it's either she has a miscarriage or it's implied she has fertility problems.
Yeah, that I mean, I always thought it was miscarriage, but that's just me.
I thought it
Um,
was miscarriage too, but it's one of the things where it's obscure enough that you can't. It could go either way. It's obscure enough that adults definitely kind of know what's going on, and kids know enough to know that there's no baby. They're making the nursery. They're in the doctor's office. They're very sad. They're packing up the nursery, and he comes. He's like, "Hey, you know what? Let's go back to adventuring. Let's try to finish our dream." And it's enough that kids understand, like, okay, there's no baby. She couldn't have a baby for whatever reason. She's sad. He's
I
trying to
think
make her happy.
I think this goes back to your second question of, like, childhood and whatnot, because I think, like a book, just to kind of use actual text, as you're young, as you're learning to read, depending how fast or slow you are. I was never a good reader until like years later. You know, you're not gonna give your kid, War and Peace at the age of 5 unless they're a super genius. Um, you want to start them out with pretty simple text, right? Like I don't know, um, The Hobbit. Well, The Hobbit was actually considered a kid's book back in the day, back in the 30s. I mean,
It's
actually, that's kind of
arguably pretty. The Hobbit compared to the Lord of the Rings is pretty tame.
Well, yeah. So you give a kid The Hobbit. The literature is not that hard. At least you hope not. Um, Although I'm thinking about, like, 5-year-olds, where you give a 5-year-old book, give them something a 5-year-old can read, and then I'm sure there's great 5-year-old stories out there that probably have some good subtext, but the actual text is pretty simple, right? Like, I don't know, the dog played and played, something like that. And then as they get better at reading, you give them harder text that is a little bit, with more sophisticated wordage, and depending on just because something has sophisticated wordage, the subtext itself doesn't mean it could be there. Um, it just means there's just bigger wordage. And I do think, like a text, the older you get, the more you should try to read books with more harder vocabulary. It's just gonna depend on the author whether or not that vocabulary has something deeper beyond it than just I'm using very big words. Um, so yeah, I think that applies to kid shows as well, where it's sort of like okay, Bluey is very simple in its plots and its stories, right? There's no deep character arc for Bluey outside of Bluey learned to share or something like that, right?
Right.
Um, but the subtext can still be there if you have a very savvy creator and writer behind it. Um, so I'm almost leaning towards in a weird way a kids show is not defined by its subtext, but more maybe just by its text to some extent. But I'm not sure still.
I'm trying to remember what I was reading at 5. That was a
I
weird
read
kid.
I read the Magic Treehouse series growing up, and as all kids, unfortunately, my age, we had our Harry Potter moment.
Oh yeah,
Um, you
I was
know,
in 3rd grade when I was reading that series.
think s- I I think so too, because I definitely remember being I wasn't 18 when the series finished, but definitely like 10. Um, and then being like 15 when the movie finished up. But
I
I
remember
mean,
being a
I
really weird
try not to
kid.
talk about Harry Potter too much, even though that would have been an interesting
Yeah,
series.
like some
Uh,
parts are just part of the cultural zeitgeist that we can't avoid it to a certain extent. It's gonna slip out sometimes. We
I mean,
understand.
yeah, look, also with
Sometimes
a prequel kid, Phantom Menace was definitely, despite its subtext, felt a lot younger than, say, Revenge of the Sith that had Anakin burning up. I mean, that's why it was PG-13, and then the others were just PG. That was the first
we can just
PG-13 Star
ignoring
Wars film. Eh,
Anakin for a moment. Like in the text, there's an actual like genocide.
that's right.
The Jedi are very much a Jewish parallel, an
Oh,
allegory of just like getting
absolutely.
murdered by this fascist empire and going into hiding.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they still play with that to this day, with like the path and the Empire looking for force sensitives and the experiments with the M count midichlorian stuff, and when if the force user is there, they gotta hide it, the kid, because the Empire gonna come and get you and do stuff to you. Um,
So you know what was a really dark book? Like, it's just sorry to go off on topic.
oh
That I
no worries.
remember reading as a kid, and even then I was thinking, this is a little dark, but I still love it.
Hmm.
Was the Redwall series?
Never heard of it. That's something.
It's the one with the like animals. There's mice and like there's the good animals. You got the mice and the voles and the moles and the rabbits and the badgers, and then there's the evil animals. You got your rats, your weasels, your foxes. Your It was a very this species is good, this species is bad. Very concept, very simple in concept. But there were moments where things got really dark. Like because there were constantly battles, and I remember like loving
Mhm.
both. I loved the battles and I loved their descriptions of food because the descriptions of food were always so colorful and
Uh-huh.
well thought out. But there was
Hmm.
like all sorts of battles. Like there's like this one very, very like dark scene of like these two kind of enemies ish. There's a squirrel and a hare, and they're kind of like bickering, and it's very she's kind of a thief, and he's like this kind of noble soldier. It's very, like they're bickering, and then like they are fighting. It's that kind of battlehood, brotherhood, camaraderie, and they're fighting side by side. And when the rest of the heroes come upon them after they've been holding the line, it's just like she's dead, and he's just like, yeah, there's gonna be lots of new because she's been stealing weapons. That's how they meet, and she's like, oh yeah, lots of weapons for you now. You'll have all the weapons you want. And then he's holding her hand, and he dies. And I remember being like 8 or 9 when I read that, and I'm like, huh, that's dark. I love it, but that's dark.
Yeah, I would never yeah, I know for I mean, this is also something I think that kind of person to person, but I was never a super sensitive kid growing up in terms of like I mean, something freaked me out, but more visual than like there were some Disney movie that freaked me out as a kid growing up. 'Cause they be scary. Like third act of Aladdin's kind of scary in retros in when I was young because Jafar the snake can be scary. Um I got over it, of course, but actually, no, I was actually kind of sensitive kid growing up in terms of just what scared me a lot. 'Cause
I
I
didn't like
hate Sheila.
Viscera. I remember I
What?
didn't like Viscera. I
So,
hated the sound of viscera and bones because like I think that's part of the reason I couldn't finish watching Child's Play for a long time.
ooh, I never liked
I think
Sheila. Obviously, as a kid growing up, because I'm deathly afraid of
oh
spiders.
Sheila, oh god, the giant spider. But yeah, no, back to the discussion where it's if we consider text more important than subtext because people can write and they have written essays upon essays upon essays of subtext. We see this on Tumblr all the time.
Oh, of
It is
course.
the site for that. I learned more about different screenshots and what it means, both on a historical, emotional, mental, and psychological level for TV shows than I could ever possibly do myself. But I consider text the most important concept. And we consider, and we're sort of like unsure exactly what defines a kid. Going back to question two, at what point is something considered appropriate or not? Because I think about kids, I think about Rick and Morty and how like teenagers and preteen, like I've seen kids as young as like 7 wearing T-shirts and carrying merch for Rick and Morty, and this is an adult. This is like a very adult-ish show. I'll say it started out, but I remember first seeing it on Adult Swim.
Yeah, I mean, I got a more crass example that I would ask you. Um, Hypothetically, let's say you one day have a kid. They're a big fan of Shira. They love their Shira. Who wouldn't? They're 10, right? Would you ever let them go on AO3 to look up the fanfics? Would you? There's a
I
question.
think
Would you?
I think it becomes.
'Cause that's in my opinion where like the text becomes the most blatant, right?
Well, I'd argue that's less text and that's more the fandom's interpretation of text. Like, subtext is think, threads that get thrown down and weaved in, and the fans pick them up and usually get a correct assumption out of it. AO3 becomes it's wish fulfillment. It's fantasy. I want it's usually either I'm satisfied with the text. Well, no, fanfiction is in some way or another, more often than not, a dissatisfaction with the text. Even if you loved the text, it is a dissatisfaction with the text because you are either creating works that expand or how you wish it would expand. Well, actually, you know what? Well, well now we, well now that actually, now that I'm speak. Well, okay. my initial thought is that it is a dissatisfaction with the text because you're creating an expansion, a non-canonical expansion, whether that's an emotional expansion, a thought on the characters, a character study, um, sequel-ish, what you wish your scene would have expanded upon, what you wish would have happened, copious amounts of sex, etc., etc. But
Exactly.
by that same thread, there's also, in the terms of S-pop in particular, a canonical expansion to the show's text on AO3 because Nate wrote a fanfic.
That's true. That is true. And it's definitely a lot more blunt about what's going on than even the show is at some points. Isn't there
So
like isn't there a whole scene where like Catcher has a mental breakdown trying to rip off her horde cloak thingy?
yeah, yeah, it very much feels like this is stuff that I couldn't, didn't have time, or wasn't allowed to put in the show because this isn't the text that was allowed to be shown necessarily, or we didn't have time to show it, whether it's restrictions or budget or timing.
Or all
So
three. Or all three.
still exists. This is still a text that exists, so I'm putting it out there.
Yeah.
But that's more of that's a very rare occurrence. Um,
I mean, look, to go back to your point about Rick and Morty, I know for myself, my mom probably would not let me watch Rick and Morty as a kid.
yeah, my mom wasn't. I was not allowed to watch Simpsons, Family Guy, South Park. Definitely not.
Pretty
I would
much,
watch
you
it
know,
sometimes, but I wasn't supposed to.
anime I got away with for the most part, but I don't think anyone understood it. Some of that probably I just don't think anyone understood it, to be fair. 'Cause it was all, and even then I didn't really watch that much anime. You know, just Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Sailor Moon, it was on. Um, I never got into Naruto or some of the other stuff on Toonami at the time. Um, Samurai Jack, it was always fun, but that's not an anime. That was very much a considered a kids show.
Yeah,
Oh, actually, here's an interesting example with Samurai Jack. How familiar are you with Samurai Jack?
pretty familiar.
What's funny is that was considered a kids show for years. The final official season though is rated like R, or I forget what the actual rating for TV is. But really, outside of blood and like hints of maybe some kissy kissy, still pretty tame like the rest of the show. It's not like it got uber dark and serious. Like Aku, the main villain, is still hilarious and funny as ever. Um,
Oh, Jack is actively contemplating suicide.
that's true. So that's an interest. I mean, maybe that's another like
Like he has a full on half of the first season of the fifth season is him mentally breaking down, and also like the concept of like because we're supposed to believe that every single other enemy that Jack has ever faced has been a robot, which okay, sure, fine, we'll let go with that. And then the fifth season's supposed to be the first time he actually has ever actually killed someone.
so. I mean, does that? I mean, does that make the argument that we value text because it's like, well, that was robots. This is actually flesh and blood. So up the rating, even though not that different from the rest of the show. And Aku's still pretty funny. I love him.
Yeah, I guess that does sort of
'Cause that's one of
that
the few shows I
level.
can think of that where that happens, where it's like, I don't see that much of a difference really with what came before. I'd say maybe a little bit of blood
Well, again, mental breakdown.
and mental breakdown, I guess.
Like that is, to be fair, that is actually.
But a catcher
I
has a
don't,
mental breakdown in She-Ra, and that's a TVY7 show.
yeah, but she doesn't have like a hallucination of herself actively telling her that she's failed and also to kill herself because she's pretty much done nothing. Like
But
I feel like you can't mention Samurai Jack without mentioning that first part of season 5, which is just he is just he's this close to ending it all.
That's true. I guess then it does actually put the emphasis on text because it's not subtle.
Yeah, that one's
It's
a little bit more blatant. Well, actually, you know what? Teen Titans. What about Teen Titans?
That's true. That was always a TV. What was Teen Titans rating? We're definitely not
I thought
rated.
it was.
It was
I think.
TVY7.
What about the Raven season? The Raven episodes, because those got very. There's a scene where Slade is actually not just Raven. Every time Slade was involved, it was a because you knew things were going to get really really dark when Slade was involved. Whether he was beating up Robin, whether he was you know grooming slash manipulating Tara, which was a canonical thing he did in the comics.
Right.
Whether he
That's a
was
look at
beating
that.
down Raven and stripping her in the street, like that was
I don't see anything that says that they changed the ratings. Um, let's see. But Teen Titans. At least not where I'm looking for. Let's see, season 4. Wait, which one was the Raven season?
that was season 4. Oh, how many seasons were there? 6?
Yeah, 5.
They might, yeah, that was season 4 because the 5th season was Beast Boys season. I remember they all had like all of them except Starfire had a season. Like Robin had a season, Stryborg had a season, Beast Boy had his season. That was season 3 of that. Beast Boy kind of had 2 seasons.
Yeah, because you got the Terra. You got
Yeah, he's got the Terra episodes, and he's got the Doom Patrol episodes.
about that. Um,
Yeah, I remember even thinking as a kid, like, huh, this is very. It's supposed to be a very dark, uncomfortable scene, even for kids, because here is this Slade again. Slade has always been Slade Wilson, full name, Deathstroke, which they don't. They very tellingly don't put in the show because they don't want to put his name in. They just
that's
always
for
call him
why for
Slade.
years I just always thought he was Slade. That's why
It's because they
I
don't
actually
want to
like
say Deathstroke. Like they don't want to say Deathstroke, so they just called him Slade. He was
I
always
always
just
like the name
Slade.
Slade. I always like the name Slade better if you could ask me because it sounded cool.
Honestly, yeah, because in the show, the way, especially the way Robin Slade says it, and it's with such hatred, Slade.
Slade.
I mean, I remember even thinking back then, where it's like, I was a preteen when I was watching this, and it's it's supposed to be it's an uncomfortable scene. It's supposed to be very uncomfortable. Where several times, especially when he's with the girls, because Tara's like, you got this looming 6 foot esque man in a mask talking to this young teenager, taunting her, giving her, doing all the red flags. I'm the only one you can trust. They don't
Right.
trust you, but I understand you. And then later with Raven, it's you can't hide from your destiny. I am the arbiter. You can't fight it. You can't fight me. Like I'm always just gonna come back. You can't fight this. I'm stripping you. I'm doing all this stuff. It's very very dark.
Dark, but so good. Of that these seasons. Yeah, it it's
Being can
very
kids pick up on that?
it is like um it is it's and no and it's also kind of interesting, but I think again kind of plays to text where if you were to directly adapt the arc where it's called what's it called called like the Faustian bargain arc. I forget what it's called in the comics. 'Cause there's an actual name for this, right? Like an actual arc in the legit
Ian, yeah. But I
like
think I've heard of that, right?
Because like, from what I know, because I've never read any Teen Titans comics, um, what I know is that if you did, like, the legit if you adapted that arc authentically, that's like a rated R storyline. I think they tried, it's with rated R. I don't remember, but the actual like, the actual the comic book version of Terra's story is way worse than what we even get in Teen Titans. It's way more, oh my god. Um, where I feel like Teen Titans was a little bit more classier about it.
It it was it was Teen Titans was funny because you had, oh, silly episode one day, they're just fighting some, guy who lives in his mom's basement who has TV powers one minute,
Okay.
and then the next you're dealing with like
Slade.
yeah, you're dealing with Slade. You're dealing with Robin, turning his teammates into bait. You're dealing with him going through a mental breakdown. You're dealing with Cyborg and his like body dysmorphia. Oh, sorry, dysphoria. And it's like the question then becomes one, and I guess that begs another question: are we under? Have we spent too long underestimating children and their ability to understand things? Are we still doing it, or are we actually finally reaching that point where we've begun to truly acknowledge that kids are way smarter than we think?
Obviously, yes, I think we have 100% been underestimating kids and what they can understand. Um, as for that second question, I feel like we've gone through dips and peaks and debs and flows. Um, I definitely think like if you like to look at a grand chart, I definitely think things have gotten better. I mean, you know, you go from Transformers the animated series to well, actually no, I take that back because I feel like again we've had like I think of kind of like early Disney movies, animated movies, and then kind of a little bit of panic in this 80s to some extent. But also, again, you go from Transformers the animated series, the original show to She-Ra today, then yeah, I think overall there's probably better things out there than there was. I would even say things have gotten better since I was a kid, right? Like, I, obviously things like I mean, shows like Subtext, like with Rugrats, for example, watching that as an adult is hilarious, kind of in hindsight. um, like I see, or even
Oh yeah.
certain stuff about SpongeBob, where it's like I've seen so much TikTok of like, as an adult, I now understand Squidward, or that guy who just goes to work and just goes like, "Coming to bed, honey? Yes, dear." Um, I understand him now. Um, I, have we finally reached the peak? No, because there's always going to be shows. I think there's always gonna be one show or two that like go kids are stupid, they can't understand things. I do think overall it's gotten better, but maybe that's just me being optimistic.
Right. I think that's fair. I think one other thing we also are neglecting to think about is how much television has again changed in terms of how it's presented.
Hmm.
Because yeah, we grew up on television
Oh
and
yeah,
TV shows on TV, and it's not that that's gone, but also you see just how much of that is presented via streaming.
that's unfair. That's one of the unfortunate things. Especially for things like cartoons, where it's like, yeah, Adventure Time. That had like 8, 10 seasons on Cartoon Network or Steven Universe and whatnot. Which I know I feel like we're going back a little bit to the text and subtext thing, but I think this is also very important. Not because it really has anything to do with kid shows, but just something that is very blatant. Diversity and LGBTQ questions, right? Like we as a kid kind of we as when we were younger, it was always kind of, poking at the edges a little bit or like heavily implied, but you never saw it. And then end of She-Ra, look what happens, and then Owl House, you actually see Lucy and Amity get to date.
And
Arcane, which I didn't
that's
watch, but I know
actually
what happens at the end. Um,
it goes back to the I think the point between television and streaming because She-Ra is rife with LGBT representation from the get-go.
and He-Man. I mean, everyone talked about what's going on in Filmation.
But I think that one is I'm thinking S-pop in particular versus Owl House because S-pop is was on Netflix and it was on Netflix from the beginning.
Right.
And as such, they had leeway to a certain extent. There was a lot they had to fight for, like the actual, I guess,
Ending.
spoiler alert, catch a door or kiss. But
Right.
Owl House, they had to. Owl House was Owl House and like Steven Universe. I know in particular Steven Universe was a huge battle for Rebecca Sugar. Just just present having to feed years, months, and weeks and years of subtext in the text that pointed at queer narrative, that pointed at queer identity, before you were allowed to have an overt queer presentation in the wedding scene. And even
Right.
then, you had to fight for like she had to fight for that. There was a lot they had to sacrifice before they could get that because they were determined to have that, and they had to had all their T's crossed and all their I's dotted
Mhm.
to try to cut down any argument that was against them, and they still almost didn't get it, even though
Yeah.
Steven Universe was incredibly successful show.
So many seasons. I always felt bad because I always kind of was on and off with Steven Universe when it was airing. 'Cause, like, I would watch episodes and I stop and I watch, stop. Cartoon Network had a very weird schedule, and I was only really there for Clone Wars at the time. Um,
That wasn't your fault. Yeah, it did have a weird schedule, like because that was the problem with, and
that
that's
and Gravity
still
Falls,
arguably the problem. Oh yeah, Gravity Falls was great. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Because especially when it comes with TV, where it's
right.
you know, especially with Cartoon Network became infamous for that, where it's like you don't know if your next season's gonna get proved.
Oh, Thundercat, that's what happened to Thundercat, which maybe in hindsight was a good thing because they had some weird ideas, that
Yeah,
maybe should have
Thundercats
kept.
was kind of weird.
Clone Wars was really, like, the only stable thing at the time, and maybe Batman: Brave and the Bold. Like, those were the 2 shows I would remember, like, these are the only things that keep going.
Clone Wars had
Uh,
that Disney money.
no, it had the George Lucas money because
Oh yeah, that
George
George.
Lucas.
Oh yeah, it was free Disney. Yeah, Clone Wars had that. Well, Clone Wars had that clout name. It had that clout name. It had that George Lucas money. Versus, well, you take the well-established multi-decade franchise and just like the power behind that versus what is essentially an indie project in the form of Steven Universe
Right. Even,
and have
even something like She-Ra on Netflix got lucky with streaming because, like, well, we need content, but also She-Ra. Does anybody really
yeah.
remember She-Ra? Kind of. If you're in the '80s, kids.
Yes, she was that way. Voltron was. I didn't watch too much of Voltron. I know it was a dumpster fire of fandom at the end.
And the show itself dipped, from what I know.
It was just imploding.
Yes.
But yeah, that comes down to. I guess if we want to reiterate our three main questions to reach a consensus question. First question is what do we consider children?
That's a good point. I don't think we even answered that one really, because it's sort of like, do you ever stop
I'd
being a
argue everyone's a kid.
Yeah, I think I honestly, seeing some of the world leaders today and whatnot, I kind of agree with that. You're just a kid with bigger diapers.
Like
I
in the
once
back
joke.
of my mind, all kids. Yeah.
I always joke. It's like you're born with diapers, you die in diapers.
That's depressing. Okay, no, that's not depressing. You know what? A lot of people do that. A lot of people have that. A lot of people go through it, and you know what? That's just part of life.
That
You
is life.
you're not any lesser for having that, whether it's something you choose or whether it's something that you have to do, part of life, and yeah, you're not any lesser. It's not it's for those who are listening to us, young or old, you're not whatever your bodily function is, you are not an embarrassment for having it.
Yeah. And hey, I if I live to the glorious age of 100 or something, I hope I'm in my retirement home writing my fanfic thingy of my whatever childhood thing I liked.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know what? Go ahead. Write your fandom, whatever age.
So yeah, I think we agree. I think that's the first question. Everyone's a kid. No one stopped really being a kid, really. If you're interested in different things.
Okay. Second question then. What is considered appropriate? Which I guess we kind of argue that because if everyone's a kid, then everything's appropriate.
That's true. I mean, yeah. Or because this is, cause I guess this is still where I still am kind of uncertain about. Because I mean, I guess in the kind of the anarchistic sense, yeah. I mean, look, I think everyone's gonna have their. I think it's a very. I mean, I think everyone's gonna be different and weird, right? Like, I kind of agree to you some extent that everything's appropriate, but at the same time, it's like I still would be hesitant of showing my kids if I had kids certain things at certain ages. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know
no,
what.
I would not show them child's play. I would not show them hereditary.
No, alright, like, I think but I do think, like, development, you kinda wanna wait to see, like, are they ready to handle this? And I don't think I would necessarily I wouldn't let age stop it, but I certainly would let maturity, uh, handle it for sure.
I would not show them, but I also acknowledge that having reached a level of adulthood, I also acknowledge that my understanding of what a kid can handle varies and is different from my interpretation of it.
That's so fair, right? Like, I mean, here's kind of an interesting thought, as much as I like, as much as we praise She-Ra for being such a mature show and TVY7, I bet you there's some kids who probably couldn't handle it, right? I bet you there's some kids who, at that perfect age of, I don't know, 7, um, would probably still freak out when they see Horde Prime and what's happened to Catra. It's like, "No, not the kitty."
Maybe even freak out when they consider what's happening with Shadow Weaver. Backgrounds, abusive mother.
Yeah. Um, I mean, in terms of what is appropriate, I think the answer is as long as 'cause I think also this I think we touched on a little bit about this, but I kind of think we could just bring this up once again. A lot of the conversations about what is appropriate, I think, always stem from the fact that, let's face it, when something's done crass, it's always in the worst ways possible. Like when people complain about the DC He-Man comics, it's not because of what they're doing from a conceptual point. It's just you can tell some guys are writing this and they're just like, let's have He-Man smash Skeletor's skull because it's awesome. And Evelyn and Hordak are getting it on. 'Cause, I don't know, witch bat fetish thing.
Yeah, mm,
No,
mm.
I mean, that's probably a good chunk of some of it, right?
I mean, even that, it's like knowing what I know about like the kind of Conan esque origins of He-Man. Like I don't know. Although if you bite what you're saying by that same argument, where it's you also have to consider, how much of what we consider appropriate is our own socially and socially structured and impressed hang-ups. 'Cause,
I mean, that's fair.
Western culture, we have a thing. Nudity,
It's true.
sex, that very Puritan-esque, and we discussed it kind of the other day where it was like, if you consider that the concepts of body shame and bodily um pride and nudity and all that stuff is the hang-ups of it aren't entirely Western. It's not necessarily a whole thing. I'm not going to say the Americas and Western culture in Europe are like Western Europe, like East. Yeah, that's entirely just constant. But that is a heavy part of our culture with heavy, often religious links to it that have impressed itself into our society on an integral level, and in turn reflects and influences how we develop entertainment.
That's true. I feel like every time we bring up something, it just gives me another thought. But that's a good discussion. Um, Anime, as you know, there's shonen anime, which is very much the kid stuff, or what people think about the kid stuff. Naruto, Pokemon, etc.
Which is wild that Naruto was part of that. The ninja show where people are dying and bleeding from the mouth and eyes.
But that's the thing. We're looking at it from a Western perspective. In Japan, I guess that's a kid show, right? Is it
Yeah, yeah.
considered a? Do the Japanese consider it a kid show? Like,
Uh,
oh,
yeah. That One Piece.
I mean, like, and what is the pro? Like, what do like the Japanese anime kids like? One of my favorite animes right now, like, oh, Evangelion, right? I Is that considered a kids show in Japan, or are kids allowed to watch it? It's the most marketed thing in Japan. I mean, it's got the toys and so many merchandise. It's the Star Wars of anime when it comes to merchandising.
That's fair. Like that's honestly, I'm not even sure if I would have my kid watch it, if only because I barely understand it when I watch it. And I
But
definitely could not answer any question they asked me about it.
neither can I. But it's like I'm just kind of thinking about it from like what's appropriate, and it's sort of like they market that thing. I don't know if they market it for kids, but they're selling kids toys. There are kids merchandise. I'm not saying that automatically makes it a kids show, but I mean, even here we sometimes do that where it's like, why does this have like a toy line? Um, why does
They
Terminator
have
have a
giant robots. But actually, isn't there only like four robots in Evangelion?
let's see, Unit One, prototype, Oscars. There's three, sometimes four if we include Mari with the rebuilds. Um,
Yeah. Kind of a low amount of robots, I'll consider, especially compared to like Gundam.
it's true. A Gundam. That's look at. I mean, well, okay. There's varied iterations of Gundam though, so.
Yeah. But even then,
But
like, different very some of the there's some dark there's some very dark political stuff going on.
but I kind of wonder if like are kids allowed to watch like G Witch? I mean, the original Gundam. Like, how young were the Japanese kids allowed to watch Gundam? Right.
Right.
But again, I guess if in Japan at least, I do wonder if they even have a concept of kids. Well, no, I think they still do because there's definitely stuff that's like, oh yeah, this is made for like little kids and cutesy stuff, like Hamtaro and Sailor Moon
Yeah.
for stuff.
Shonen,
But
like, there's definitely like you have your shonens and you have like I would put yeah, if we gotta argue, yeah, because you got your Naruto's and your One Pieces and even your Dragon
you're
Balls, where it's like,
uncut,
yeah,
you
they
know,
have
you're uncut with the blood and the guts and the swearing.
yeah, you also have your obligatory beach episodes, you know?
Yeah,
And then you have like Death Note.
it's true. Although, no, I don't think kids would watch Death Note. Well, I don't know. I don't know what the Japanese mind kids like. I don't live there.
Well, that becomes the question. Like, is it with the well, not only I think the question isn't would they, because kids will watch almost anything. I watched anything because you just want to watch TV. I watched the news,
That's
even
true.
though
I
I
watch the
cared
news too.
basically nothing about it when I was a kid, because that was the only thing that was on TV.
That's true. I mean, I think it all comes down to the fact that the very concept of kids show is sort of opaque and doesn't really exist outside of just individual what can somebody handle. And I think that's the one thing I do like about Japan is that outside of like very specific shonen, it does seem like they're way more just look, you're gonna watch it. This is what we want to talk about. You can handle it or you can't. Some things are we some shows are more graphic because we wanted them to be. Others are not. Right?
So I have a question: what is the Japanese rating like?
I just always felt the Japanese TV rating system. I mean, they got some. I think they made a guard like 12, 18 sort of thing. Um, they have the PG, PG 12, PG R 15, R 18. That's kind of their
Okay,
rating. So they got a G for everybody, PG 12 for anybody under 12, anybody under R 15, and then anybody 18.
yeah,
And I'll be honest,
okay.
I've always seen ratings as more like guide. To quote Barbosa, they're more like guidelines than hard cases of like, hey, parent who should be responsible and not just let their kid become a mindless zombie. Um, this is rated R. You should probably watch it with them if you really think they can handle it, or don't have them watch it at all. If it's PG-13, then before they turn 13, maybe give it a watch, unless they're a very mature 12-year-old, right?
Fair, fair. Here's a line here that I think actually becomes a very interesting element. I'm looking at the wiki page for
Mhm.
the Japanese rating system in film. And
Right.
yeah, there's an argument that the rating, as Earring's defenders argue that the independence shields filmmakers from the more draconian alternative government censorship, which they're not wrong, both there and here, because the fact of the matter is someone is always going to have a problem with something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You showed two women kissing. How dare you? My
How dare
Christianness.
there be kissing? How dare women hold hands? How dare these men hug too long? How dare this, how dare that? Like, you have parent watchdog websites
Yeah.
like yeah, like different shows, which is it's actually kind of hilarious, but
Bluey's of
oh,
Satan's descent. I'm sure there's
pretty
more.
much. But it's just someone's always going to have some issue about um a TV show, and someone's always going to have some opinion about a TV show. With that said, that rating system does kind of make sense because at the end of the day,
Parents
you're
can't see your kids
taking
get the movie. Parents who pay for the movie or the show.
yeah, your parents pay for the movie, your parents pay for the show, but also children, both young and old, have at a certain point it's like, okay, that's why I think that there definitely does need to be a discussion. And that is one of the things that definitely needs to is it's definitely it is a constant part of what is considered healthy parenting. Because even though I myself am not a parent, so take this with a grain of salt, but that is often considered a healthy sign of parenting in which you are talking to your kids about what is. It's just like an AO3 fanfic.
Hmm.
There is tagging. There's
Right.
tagging of what you're seeing. It is on the tin. And while some like 70s, 80s films, early 90s films are a little odd and not always necessarily great.
Or sometimes not even as bad as I think we would think of them today. Like, I've watched The Godfather. It's rated R. It's probably the right rating, but at the same time, I saw it when I was, like, in my teens with my mom, 'cause that was her first rated R movie. It's not that bad.
And it comes down to it, right? Because a lot of such ratings come down to crime element, but also just like smoking tobacco and alcohol. And it's something that half the people who are, especially half the kids, quote unquote, who are watching it, probably see their parents do anyway.
Coming back home and Dad's smoking his cigarettes and mom's taking her happy pills for the night. Ah, America in the 50s.
Yeah. And you aren't wrong when you point out that, like, a lot of these ratings are developed along the guidelines of white puritanical concepts.
So true.
So, in regards to what is appropriate for kids, in the end,
Mhm.
I are in the end, I believe it. I don't necessarily feel that kid exploration of something should be stifled,
No.
even if it's some stuff that we don't necessarily like. Am I giving like? Am I setting up like? Am I if I ever have a kid? Am I ever setting? Am I necessarily setting them up for with a pre-made account for Pornhub? No.
Best parent ever. Hello. Ah. Yeah.
But it's like that awkward PSA from like the '80s with the masturbating kid.
Uh. No. I don't remember that one. I have an interesting example. I think to kind of go back to, or funny enough, where a lot of this topic started with. Let's say you have a kid, and they love Star Wars. They're 11, then
Yeah.
10. Would you let them watch Andor? Or would you let them watch Andor by themselves, or would you want to watch it when that scene happens from season 2?
I think I, I think because I think I would not want them to watch it because it is one of those things that, and again, I'm not a parent. I don't necessarily plan to become a parent anytime soon. That said, I would like to hope and imagine that I cultivate an environment in which if I had a kid, they would be willing to talk to me or ask me about what is happening, something they don't understand, or something that is confusing, or something that is disturbing, or they don't necessarily know what's going on. That said, I also think that there's some elements that I can't, and I don't necessarily, I should shield them from everything.
Right.
And I would rather, there are some things where it's like, if we go back to the Teen Titans episode, where the Slade and Terra and the discussions with that, and like, you can tell at a young age, this is a disturbing scene. You can tell at a young age, something's very, very wrong
Blade
here.
holding Raven, whose half clothes are ripped, and she got tattoos all over her. Her hair's
Yeah,
longer for no reason.
you can tell there's something wrong here. You know, even as a kid, this is there's something dark, there's something bad, there's something evil going on. And I'd rather they look at that and they see that warning sign and they understand that warning sign of strange man or even strange woman or even strange person reiterating and regurgitating these lines about trust and you can never escape and you have no power and I'm the only thing you can turn to. in this context, knowing that this is a wrong context, I'd rather they be able to see that and understand that it is wrong than have to have that in real life and not understand what's wrong with it until too late.
That's such a great point, and I agree. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, that's the beauty of fiction, right? Where you can tell these stories even when you dress it up with like cool masked man in armor, which sometimes has red lightsaber and does cool tricks. Right? You know, or in Slade's case, kind of. I mean, hey, Slade's a cool. Slade's kind of cool still. I mean, in terms of just his action pack stuff, but you know, like weird masked guy with one eye who voiced by Ron Perlman. Um, like
Yeah, like,
this seems
show them
awesome.
Revenge of the Sith. Let them see that, and let them see. Okay, yeah, they can see the real rule of cool. They can see this interesting story, but also, hey, not shy away from the fact that what's going on, this horror, like even just like things are gonna go wrong when Anakin's popping a lightsaber in front of children.
Yeah, I mean, you know, here's you know, we talk about grooming and whatnot. Palpatine's a total groomer. Like he is Makima levels of been grooming Anakin since he was 11 years old.
Mm,
Old man.
mm, I feel like Star Wars actually kind of drops the ball a little bit on that media wise because they kind of don't have that as much in the movies.
Yeah, it's more in the
You,
books. It's a books
it's
thing.
more in the books. You don't really see his. 'Cause he doesn't really talk to Palpatine that much in Episode 2, does he?
Yeah, just once.
Yeah, it's just like you don't really see that like, oh yeah, you've been my friend for so long concept until see Episode 3.
And they fill it in later with comics and stuff where it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
he was talking to Palpatine. Actually, funny enough, there's actually interesting comic they did a couple years ago that's set in between episodes 1 and 2 where Anakin's like 12 at this point, and Palpatine, and he's having trouble at the Jedi Academy, and Palpatine's like, "Hey, Obi-Wan, I see you're having trouble with your apprentice. You know, I was a young man once. Let me talk to him." And Palpatine and Anakin kind of go to the underbelly of Coruscant for like a secret thing. It's kind of funny because Palpatine has the hood up and is like, "It's Darth Sidious in real life, but it's just Palpatine." And the two of them are just kind of like doing some political thing, but it's like Palpatine trying to teach a lesson to young Anakin about, you know, kind of doing stuff outside the office.
yeah. That part was, and that whole part was weird. Like you look back later, it's like, yeah. It's actually starting to think about just how much of the grooming element of Palpatine and Anakin actually takes place off screen.
It really does, you know. I mean, that's he tries again later, but he tries again with the next generation. But yeah, I mean, there's if you read some of the book stuff, like there's an element of that in Plagueis novel, ironically enough, with Palpatine and Plagueis, where like Plagueis is like, "Ooh, I got this sucker kid. Yep, I've got him trapped. He's gonna come to me now. He killed his family. I got him."
I feel
And then
like that's
Palpatine's
every
like,
Sith, isn't it?
"That's pretty yeah." I mean, there is a dark element of Sith and grooming for the most. I mean, I'm watching Maul Shadow Lord. I mean, it's not grooming, but there's definitely like, yeah, kind of grooming.
Maul
You know,
definitely tries to groom Ezra in Rebels.
I was talking more like Sidious and Maul when because Sidious portraying Maul when he was like 11.
Yeah, that's just straight up grooming an abusive relationship. Like, but yeah, Maul definitely tried to do some shady stuff in Rebels to Ezra. Like,
And we
but
don't
yeah,
see. I mean,
no,
and then obviously we got She-Ra and Shadow Weaver and all that
yeah,
unpleasant.
that's incredibly. Mother Gothel, well, is that grooming?
It's definitely Stockholm syndrome. I think.
Yeah, interesting question. But yeah, no, if we, at the end of the day, what comes down to appropriate, I think, is what is appropriate, I think, comes down to an open discussion between parent and child. And if you cannot have that, because not everyone has that, no, not everyone has the opportunity to have that.
Right.
And it comes down to open discussion with yourself. You are not a wimp or a patsy or weak or anything. If there's this media that you can't stomach or you're
Oh, yeah.
uncomfortable with, and if you're uncomfortable with it, you are
That's
there is no
so
shame
valid.
in ever turning it off.
Right
And there's
on.
no shame in ever researching why that makes you uncomfortable. What like looking into that. Like at the very least, understanding your limits, if whether it's to overcome them or avoid them.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, like I'm a pretty good at what I'm. I know for myself, I'm at this point in my life, I'm pretty okay with a lot of things. Just not spiders. And I guess I don't like watching horror movies in theaters. But then in the end, I haven't seen a horror film in a theater in a long time. So, but I do get easily scared and stuff. Um, on
I'm not
TV,
really
it's
a
a little
horror
different.
person either.
Like that's why I didn't actually. That's why I actually have not seen Sinners because I don't like horror. Um, I
This is
would be
actually
willing.
less horror than I thought it was gonna be.
It's actually not as bad, not that horror driven.
It's I mean a lot of it is horror like more of the horror comes from the general racism than anything else. Because it's vampires, so a lot of it is mostly I guess spoiler alert. It's a lot of vampires, so a lot of it is more the creepy dancing and also just them jumping on people to drink their blood.
I can handle that unless it's like a jump scare thing. Even then, it's like
There's
for
a
like
few
5 seconds.
jump scares. I think most of the horror is, and it is deliberately for this, comes from like, yes, the vampires, but also just the
Racism.
general horror of racism and discrimination, and just like, because spoiler alerts, there's just a time limit, whether it's you die to the vampires or you die to the clan that's coming to kill you the next day.
See, that I can handle. Because I know because I love history and I kind of can I study history, so it's like I can handle because I'm pretty good at that. But no, I mean, like, look, if you don't like blood, if you don't like even the subtext of certain things, like we mentioned it before, I get it. And I do think it's interesting to have these discussions of things that have been primarily made kind of dumbed down. I mean, I guess like He-Man originally, should it ever touch these things? And my answer is like, yeah, if it's done good, I don't mind it.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I guess it becomes a question of detail as well. If how much detail because that does come like if you have that scene from Andor and it becomes it goes from a 2-3 minutes quick scene with the implications to
Oh, she says
a
the R
20
word, so she says that's
yeah, like it goes from that versus the 20-minute esque thing where we have to see it.
yeah.
I'm not Yeah, that does go back to the level of what is crass versus what is good storytelling and what is proofs to be acknowledged,
Mhm.
reconciled, and understood versus what is something for just general. What is schluck shock factor?
Right, 'cause, like, I'll be honest, I can't think of anything that does a full-on 20-minute thing like that that's not crass.
And
Like,
that's just porn. That is somebody's fetish.
that's true, like, if there's implications, it's either you cut to black or you just hear a little bit of punting, and that's it, and you're done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess
But no,
that's
I agree, like, I would never want that in a He-Man thing. It got weird when Skeletor and Evil-Lyn were coming close to it.
that's just because Skeletor doesn't have a face.
It's true.
Which is nothing against people without faces.
Yeah, yeah.
You can love too, even if you have a skull for a face.
exactly. But no, I would agree with that.
I guess it comes down to what was our third question? Getting a little late. Was,
Childhood, what is childhood? What's appropriate? Um, Django, what was the third question? I should have wrote that down. Um,
I should have
was
written it down. What is childhood? What is appropriate? I will cut this out later.
what is the limit? I think we're talking about. Oh no, text versus subtext. That's what we were talking about.
Oh yeah, text versus subtext. So, what is childhood? So, if we that brings us to the third and final question: reiteration.
Text versus
Is
subtext.
text versus subtext. The importance of text versus subtext.
And it seems like we very much value text, but I think you can still get a. I think you can't get away. It seems like in our society, you can't get away with text, but you can get away with a lot of subtext if you're smart.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, if I think at the end of the day, in many ways, and again, take this. This must be taken with a grain of salt because I am an American with often American sensibilities that are
Exactly.
socially ingrained to me. As much as open minded as I try to be, I understand there's also things that are part of me that I don't even understand, that I don't always
Exactly.
acknowledge, that I don't always know the limits of. But I would
Exactly.
rather have a cleverly woven subtext within the text than the explicitity of subtext. And sometimes you want the subtext to be explicit, mind you. But I think
Hmm.
at many times it's almost more creative and because develops a better narrative for that subtext to be cleverly woven into the text. I don't
Absolutely.
always, yeah. Sorry, say that again?
Oh, I was gonna say absolutely, and I think a lot of it kind of depends on like what are we talking about. Like, for example, I don't, and I totally get this. Like when it comes to like representation, I want actual text. Not just well, they might. Are they? Like no, I want them to say, "Here's my girlfriend. Um, here's my wife. Here's my husband. You got two moms, or two dads." But another time, it's like this can be an allegory for something. We don't have to explicitly say it, but
Yeah. Don't shy away necessarily. Like, don't shy away from allegories. Don't necessarily shy away from text. But in many ways, it's almost more impactful, I would argue, that it is the subtext.
and it's also depending on the type of story you want to tell. Like people, like we have this debate in our fandom so much, and I see this all the time of like people talking about the war and She-Ra, and it's like, but She-Ra is not a war story. Avatar was more of a war story. She-Ra has the implications, right? Like we love to joke about this every time like the Celine's battle happened. It's like Thatcher murdered millions of civilians. We love making that joke. But that is the subtext. But we don't see it, and we don't need to see it because that's not really the story they're trying to tell about a story about friendship and whatnot. And true love
Yeah.
conquers all. We don't
We
really need
don't
to get
need to
into the
see it to know that it happens, and we don't need to see it to know not realize that there is a tragedy that has occurred.
and that catcher probably should like people probably want war crime trials happening or something. Um, we don't need that.
Yes. Etheria Nuremberg.
Exactly. Catra, Hordak, Lonnie, Brocaria, all there.
Just
Who's
let
got the
Lonnie live her best life.
yeah, yeah. But that she was not interested in that compared to say like Avatar, which was a little bit more interested in like that war aspect.
I think that was the second thing that actually prompted our discussion, right? Well, the difference between Avatar and Legend of Korra.
'Cause, yeah, let's. I remember the here season a little bit, and it's like it explicit. It's not. It's pretty explicit. Cora's getting violated.
Yeah, it's very. She's got flashbacks, like all of even for all of its failures, I do appreciate Legend of Korra. Not only because I really like the show, because in many ways its failures kind of make it better in some respects. But
I respect its failure because I know it was not given the TLD it was promised from Nickelodeon.
I respect its failures. I respect that they kept trying,
Mhm.
especially come season three. Like they were like, okay, this isn't working. We know this isn't working. They even though they gave them a poor time slot. They gave them like online only. It's like we're still gonna do our level best to tell this story of a changing world. And is it always? Will I argue that? Oh my gosh, I'm not gonna say oh the impactful story of Aang and all that. And it's like it's not Aang's. It doesn't compare to Aang because it's not Aang's story.
Right.
The story of a teenage girl, an isolated teenage girl, coming into the world, having to deal with a world that has changed away from the books and the lessons she's been presented, and also just having to deal with this title that has been thrust upon her at birth from a young age, groomed into this position, and realizing she doesn't really fit in it, and having to deal with just all the pain and struggles of everyone judging her for her as she's trying to find herself and who she is,
Mhm.
while the world is determined to lay its sins at her feet.
I think that just gets into the question you asked a while ago of like if we've improved, and I think the answer is yes because I think we're just more willing to put subtext into our kids shows. I think that's what it comes down to. It's like we put more subtext into our kids shows, even if the text itself is still fun, comedy driven, you know, action.
Yeah. Like I know for especially as I didn't necessarily. Other people might have picked it up, but I know, and that's the other thing I think we also have to remember is that our audience grows. These
Exactly.
stick with our audience as they grow and they come. Like I did not, even though it probably should have been obvious, I didn't quite realize just the concept of like these work camps that get developed in Legend of Korra season four, and how Kavir is putting all these non-Earthbender nationals into camps, and just the implications of that.
Yeah. I think I probably picked up on it because I was a history buff, so I kind of knew that stuff at the time. Like I was like, oh, I know where this is going, and it's not good. Um, but no, I mean,
I wasn't a history buff for a while.
um, and also I remember watching some reviewers, who were Star Wars nerds at the time, comparing it like Goofy was like, and now the first Earth Empire for a safe and secure society. Sorry. Um, but no, I
Maybe
mean,
last more than 30 years.
exactly. Hey, I mean, Kuvir is worse. It only lasts for like what, a couple days, a couple weeks.
I
Um,
think it lasted like a month.
Palpatine. Yeah, but once again, Palpatine beat her out. Yay. But no, yeah. I mean, I think that we just are putting more subtext into our kids stuff. And, I don't want to say there was like a time we never did. Like, I think Disney films in the ye old times. I mean, Disney films, Don Bluth films had lots of subtext. Especially the good ones. Um,
Oh, yeah. American Tail.
yep, yep. I mean, that was that was kind of the funny thing. We kind of go back to the original to the beginning, and then we can probably wrap up. It's like, we had American Tail in theaters, and then Transformers in on TV. Where I mean, there were some good episodes, but it's like there's no subtext. It is just text of like. I mean, sometimes text is fine. Like there was like some of the environmental episodes are always fun, but it's very much just the evil robots are doing the bad. The good robots must do the good. This is Skeletor's evil plan of the year. Compared to now, where it's like there's still that, but now there's like deeper subtext to all of it.
You know what, actually, I think we should probably discuss one day?
What?
The evolution of edutainment.
That would be kinda cool. Like,
You're
Blue's
saying these
Clues with
things, and I'm
Bluey.
like,
Blue's Clues
a
with
lot of
Bluey.
that 80, yeah, Bluey and Dora, but also just like a lot of that stuff, you know, E-Man, very. There's a reason it's so campy, and it's like, oh yeah, because you have to throw a lesson in at the end of it.
Captain Planet, he's a hero.
Captain
Always
Planet,
takes the big lead.
Transformers, Mario Show, Sonic.
What's funny with Sonic is there were 2 versions of Sonic. And I know this because when I was younger, I was a nostalgia critic guy, unfortunately, I know. Um, but he talked about the Sonic shows. He talked about the very cartoony one, and then there was another one that was like I think it was like
The
Sonic
Set AM.
AM,
Yeah,
and I
Set
and
AM
he
Sonic.
and he always praised that one because that one was a little bit more sophisticated in its storytelling. I mean, for the time.
That one had
Um,
a full on Civil War.
well, yeah, so it kind of goes to show that there was more subtext in that probably than um the cartoony Sonic. And of course, with Batman the animated series is sort of interesting because there was always some sort of lesson at the end because that was a very episodic show.
Yeah, you know what? That is a discussion for another day. In fact, you know what? I would like to ask our audience. Hopefully, you guys are out there. Uh, Joel listed off our socials. We also have an email, warhammerweebs@gmail.com. And we would love for you guys to email us or drop a line or drop a post or anything about both this discussion and kind of whether or not you'd be willing to hear us discuss other such discussions like this. This is kind of a new format instead of us just talking about Warhammer or anime lore. And I think we raised some pretty poignant um, points today.
I agree. I mean, I love a good discussion because that's what I do on some of my other shows that I've been doing. So, yeah, this was fun, kind of talking about what makes a kid show, um, and kind of all the various factors that get into it, and how just it's evolved over time, by a lot, especially on the TV side of things.
Yeah, that it has. End of the day, it comes down to you.
Hmm.
But
And,
oh, keep going.
yeah, and will you be the kid who just wants to watch Bluey, or you gonna be an odd kid who's like, my first thing is Black Lagoon. I want to meet. I worry about that a little bit, but you know what? You do you, kid.
That's a little worrying, but I can't say anything about it. I've already laid down the gauntlet.
Yep.
But Joel, it was nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too. This was a good discussion.
Pete. It was nice talking to you guys too. I'm Kimara.
I'm Joel.
This has been Warhammer and Weebs. Thanks for listening.